Nuclear. Australia is the nation that never quite got there in terms of developing a nuclear power industry. We've been blessed with abundant raw materials, including energy sources such as coal, sun, wind, gas, and uranium. A federal election will be held in 2019, and energy and climate will be a voter issue. Additionally, the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act is due for formal review this year. This is the Act which contains Clause 140A, the ban against the most powerful low-carbon energy technology. The greatest tool for promoting understanding is discussion, and it is well overdue in Australia. Welcome to Going Fission, Australia's nuclear technology discussion. Committed listeners to Going Fission will know that the first interview I conducted was with Dr. Ben Hurd, founder of the NGO Bright New World. Well, as of August last year, Bright New World has a new general manager, one who has extensive experience with representing mining and energy in South Australia. Dayne Eckermann, welcome to Going Fission.
Yeah, thank you, Logan. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for agreeing to do this. We'll come back to Bright New World a little bit later, but prior to this, you worked for the South Australian Chamber of Mines and Energy, or SACOME. What's their role?
So effectively, most of the states in Australia have a membership-based organisation that represents mainly all the mining kind of sector companies, and in South Australia, we were also representing oil and gas kind of companies as well. In addition to that, we also had memberships from people who provide services to those industries. So, anything ranging from legal right through to equipment, that sort of stuff. And yeah, basically it was our role to advocate for the industry, be their voice. So rather than having, tens and hundreds of different companies talking to the government, they could pretty much come through us and we could be that conduit to the industry, effectively.
Yeah, nice. So sort of more specifically, what was the focus of your role there?
So when I started there, it was a new role that they started up, and so my original title was Policy Analyst and Researcher. So basically what that meant was that the directors who managed the policy at SACOME needed a bit of extra assistance with doing the research, the policy stuff, and all that sort of thing. So they brought me on board to do all that, and then as my role progressed, basically I got more and more responsibility in, leading policy projects and speaking at events and organising things like that. So then I ended up becoming the senior policy advisor. So effectively, yeah, it's a role where you create, deploy and manage policy that the members at SACOME would like us to pursue. So, yeah.
Sort of as a resource body that's state-focused, how does it sort of interact with Minerals Council of Australia, which is more nationally focused?
Yeah, so that's exactly right. So the Minerals Council is a national kind of focus. They only focus on the minerals side of the resources sector, whereas SACOME we looked after both oil and gas and minerals in South Australia. But basically, yeah, Minerals Council is national, if you look at it that way, and SACOME was a state body. I think New South Wales, Queensland and Western Australia all have their own state ones, whereas Northern Territory and Victoria are divisions of the MCA. And effectively, yeah, on issues where they crossed state borders or there are national issues, say, for example, the Resources Super Profits Tax back in 2010, I reckon it was, that's where people like the MCA and SACOME and the Queensland, New South Wales and West Australian chambers would also come together to talk about those issues and coordinate responses and those sorts of things.
Can you tell us about the South Australian Public Opinion Survey that you guys have conducted in regards to uranium?
Yeah, so I don't know if a lot of people know this, but South Australia is home to the largest reserves of uranium in the world. I believe Australia has 27% of the world's uranium reserves, and South Australia has 25% of the world. So basically 80%, round thereabouts, is all located in South Australia. Because of that, uranium was a key focus when we were working at SACOME to look at, enhancing the industry. And one of the things to keep in mind with policy and these sorts of things, it's essential to know what the public thinks and where their attitudes lay with certain issues, and one of them being uranium. It always has that, how do I put it? It has that kind of negative stigma associated with it in terms of what the general public perceives. So when we did these surveys, one of the things, so everyone asked the same question, which is, do you support or oppose, uranium mining in South Australia? That's fine, but what that shows is, because these polls are conducted on the telephone when someone's sitting at home by themselves, they are giving their personal opinion without any external factors influencing them. So they're more open to saying yes to something that's controversial because there's no repercussions or consequences or peer pressure or whatever.
It's not the town hall.
Exactly, it's not the town hall. Like, there'll be a lot of people sitting in a town hall that will keep quiet. It's only the really vocal ones that get up there and push their agenda. So this originally came from a uranium survey from Camco in Canada. What they asked was, what is your what is your attitude towards uranium mining? And the second question was, what do you perceive as the community's attitude towards uranium mining? So what they're asking there is, what do you think, and what do you think the community thinks? So when we did this survey back in 2013, we asked, what's your level of support? And we got 55% support and 25% opposition to uranium mining. That actually exceeded what we were expecting to receive. And then when we asked that second question, what do you perceive the community's attitudes are towards uranium mining? We got 29% opposed and 14% positive. So what it showed to us was there was this inverse relationship between what I thought and what I perceived the community thinks. So when we look at that, and when we presented these findings to the public, and also we presented them to particularly politicians, it was a bit of an eye-opener for them, because what they were doing is they were doing that second question. They were looking at what the community's perception was and perceiving it to be exactly the same way that everyone else did who did this poll, which was there's negative support. When we presented that, it made people go, oh, okay, maybe we've got our perception of the community wrong. Maybe what this showed us was there was 55% support when they're by themselves at home, but our assumption was incorrect, that they were all opposed, which means that, and we were talking about this, if you go to a barbecue, what it showed was if you had 5 people, 3 of them would be for it and 2 of them for against it, but everyone sitting there thinking, not talking, would be looking at it going, oh, everyone else here is opposed to this. We don't want to, talk about this anymore. Exactly, we don't want to rock the boat. So when we presented that, it actually demystified a lot of the public perceptions of uranium mining. And it actually, when we came again around 3 years later during the Royal Commission and we did the same thing again, when we asked that second question, it actually shifted again. We still had that inverse correlation, but it wasn't as pronounced as the first one. So we were seeing a little bit of filtering through that these perceptions that people had, they were realizing, oh, hang on, people actually do support this. It's okay for me to talk about it, which, is if you talk to any sociologist and psychologist, it is a phenomenon with a lot of things in society that people don't tend to put forward their personal views if they perceive it to be controversial. So doing things like these polls actually helps in informing people going, oh, okay, well, this isn't as bad as what we think it is.
Yeah, sweet. You mentioned earlier on that the Australian share of uranium is 27%. I've heard it quoted as anything as high as 40% and now down to 27%. Where does the sort of number come from? Is it from the Red Book, and is it constantly sort of in a bit of a state of flux as new reserves are discovered, or what's the...
The Uranium Red Book, which is the publication that's produced by the IAEA, that is a go-to guide for that, and that's where that figure would come from. But also, every state has one. They have a mining department, And the mining department here in South Australia has actually it is ranked as the best geological record in the world. Their database basically incorporates every single drill hole that's ever drilled and all the results. And so effectively, so when an exploration company comes to South Australia, they will do their exploration project. They will get a bunch of, so for people who don't know, there's different types of drilling methods with minerals. One of them you can do is diamond core drilling. It's basically where you drill down and you get the drill bit has a hollow center. So basically you're cutting out a core of what you're drilling through. All that core samples and the other drilling methods where it just brings up loose material, all that sampling, that sort of stuff is surrendered back to the mining department and is stored in a special library we have here. So all that information, all the different identified resources are then kind of put into this geological database, and then from that they can infer what the size of the resource here is in South Australia. And there is a code that is set up so that these measurements are as accurate as possible and done by competent people. Because back in I'm trying to think what decade it was, either the 70s or 80s, we had an incident here in Australia called Poseidon Nickel where they reported some drilling results and everyone jumped on the company because they thought they found the biggest nickel deposit in the world. And in fact, they didn't really have that much of a resource at all, and it collapsed, and a lot of people lost a lot of money on it. So they had to develop this. So they had to develop this code, which is then goes and informs the things like the Uranium Red Book, where you have measured, indicated, inferred resources. Yeah, exactly. And in every mining company has to issue these kind of measurements, and from that they can then determine what the different levels of resources are. And the Uranium Red Book does take their data for South Australia from the mining department here and their own measurements as well. I know of the guy who did that, and he was from South Australia, and it's a very comprehensive assessment.
Yeah, right. How often is that new information updated? A couple of months or?
I believe they receive it as it comes in, but it's updated. I can't remember if it's every year or every 2 years.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, it's on the IAEA's website and the Uranium Red Book, and I believe the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency also has a free copy available through their website as well.
Yep. Hey, I thought it was interesting because I remember studying and looking at the Red Book myself. Yeah, it had the measured, inferred, or measured, indicated, and inferred resources. I thought that was just a thing they did for uranium, but is that recognised broadly throughout the mining industry?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so any mineral resource will have those figures associated with it. It gives oil and gas industry has it too, but they have a different kind of measurement structure. But it gives people an idea. What's a good example? For example, somewhere like Venezuela has a lot of oil, but when you look at what type of oil it is and where it's located, it's a different story to extract it and get onto it. Whereas somewhere that has moderate reserves of a high, of a measured level, you can be quite assured that, okay, we can get at that sort of resource, we can dig it out. So yeah, when people are looking at these, the actual figure is for Australia is 27% and South Australia is 25%, and that comes straight from the mining department. And I believe that's an amalgamation of the different levels to arrive at those figures. So
yeah. I think it's also possibly for those that might not have been involved in the mining industry, coming back to sort of the drilling and the core samples one might do, what you would do is you would have a drill rig set up and you would take core samples along a grid and you would be able to analyse that, and from looking at all of that you would be able to figure out what the ore body looks like, or how you'd be able to figure out a 3D space model where the best ore is and how you'd go ahead with mining that. Yeah,
exactly, and that's what they do, and through different stages of exploration, it's like defining the resource. So your initial drilling will be quite widely spaced out grid of drill holes, and then as you hone in on that mineral target, you get more finer and finer with your grid spacings. And then as a mine is operational, they will continually drill and take core and samples and that sort of stuff, basically to the point where a mine can set up a block model. Think of it as in terms of all different Lego blocks, and they can make up a Lego block. I think one company told me it's 8 by 8 by 8 meters cubed, and they know when they drill into that and then blast it, when the excavator goes in to dig out a block, it knows exactly what grade of ore and where to send it in the mine, whether they're going to send it to a run-of-mine pad where they store it or where it's going to go straight to the crusher. So then when they send that stuff straight to the crusher, they know exactly what grades of whatever mineral they're looking for are going through that process. So they know in the end what they're supposed to get out. It was actually kind of when I first started at SACOME and I went to visit on sites and see all these things, I was actually kind of blown away by how defined and how, they can get these kind of resource models and definitions and all that sort of stuff. So
communities surrounding nuclear power stations tend to have a broader public understanding and acceptance than those communities more isolated from it. Is this mirrored in South Australia and uranium mining?
It is to a degree. The thing to remember about South Australia is everyone in South Australia is basically located around Adelaide and the two Gulfs that are down here, whereas our uranium mines, Beverley and Honeymoon, are out on the Barrier Highway, right kind of far up north near the Flinders Ranges there. The other big one, which is the biggest deposit, is Olympic Dam, which is, just next to Roxby. And Roxby Downs is a mining town, effectively. It was created for that mine. So the people in that community, they are understanding of the deposit and that sort of stuff. And even if they don't work in the mine, they work for a company or for a service that supports the mine. And so when looking at their attitudes, they're more favourable because they're familiar with it. They know what it is, know what goes on. They might know someone who's in the radiation management department of the mine, whereas the other ones like Honeymoon and Beverley, there's hardly anyone out there. It's just pastoralists and a few remote communities. And what you find is, there is a familiarisation effect, that when people become familiar with something that has a perceived high risk, they become more comfortable with it. This was something that we touched on in the Nuclear Fuel Cycle Royal Commission when I was at SACOME. One of the things we noticed was the more someone becomes familiar with something to do with the nuclear industry, the more able they are to either be comfortable with it and just live with it or support it. And we looked at France, because France is compared to Australia, it's a small country and it has a lot of nuclear and a lot of nuclear facilities in the country. And we're wondering why they had this broad support with people living next to these communities. We found out first that the French government actually gave people lower taxes in these areas where nuclear power plants be developed. And you can kind of see that as a way of the government incentivising, people to stay near the plant. And as time's gone on and people have lived in these communities and they've lived next door to plant operators or people who work in it, they become more comfortable with it. They're less likely to outright oppose it. And we found those sorts of similar things here in South Australia with uranium mining. People who knew someone or worked with someone or understood it, they were fine with it. They didn't have a problem with it. When we presented this to the first citizens jury at the Royal Commission, we did a presentation that was solely focused on that perception of nuclear, to present the positive sides of the industry and to frame it in that context. And the example we used was, I just found this completely by accident, is in Switzerland, the Groningen nuclear power plant is located 2 kilometres as the crow flies from the Lindt chocolate factory.
Ah, nice.
Now, the Lindt chocolate factory, so Easter is coming up, and everyone loves, like, Lindt chocolate is like that expensive chocolate that people get, something special. And what we did was we presented the Göttingen nuclear power plant in Switzerland, and if you go 30 k's from the Lindt chocolate factory, there is this Villag nuclear fuel repository, so where Switzerland stores all their spent nuclear fuel. And because the Royal Commission was looking at this spent nuclear fuel storage proposal, we presented that as well. And one of the things we did was we put Lindt chocolates on the table for everyone, and everyone thought it was just a nice gesture. And when it came to the end of the presentation and we said, oh, and also these nuclear power plants are next door to Lindt chocolate, but it doesn't stop you from eating Lindt chocolate because there's nothing wrong with the Lindt chocolates, you could see everyone in the audience kind of go, oh, and it clicked on like a light bulb. And when we finished it up, we talking about familiarization, because it helps for someone to personally associate something they've experienced with this sort of thing. And we talked to them like it's exactly like a roller coaster. Anyone who's been on a roller coaster knows when you're in the lineup, there is an anxiety that sets in and there's a nervousness. And when you push yourself to push yourself through that anxiety and you get on the roller coaster and it goes and you end up and it's one of the most fun things you do all day, and you get off and you're like, oh, I want to do that again. Going from where you started with that high anxiety level to the end and going, actually, that wasn't as bad as I thought. That process is the similar process with nuclear. That, people in Australia have a predisposition where they're opposed. That's just the status quo here. But when they kind of, and use another analogy, dip their toes in the water and get comfortable with it, they realise, actually, this isn't so bad. It actually isn't as bad as I thought it was. So, that is something that we, put forward and recognised, and it's, that perspective was fed in through sociological kind of studies and psychological studies and how people think and react to certain things. If anyone wants a good start on that sort of stuff, Thinking Fast and Slow by Dayne Eckermann, that's a great book to understand how the mind works in terms of, we react based on our emotional response first, but then the rational part kicks in afterwards. And so it's how do you talk to people about these issues with keeping, what we know in mind, basically.
Yeah, very good. Tell us a bit about the Finkel review and the recommendations SACOME made to it.
Yeah, so the Finkel review, for those maybe overseas who don't know about it, is in 2016 in Australia, we had what would have been the first incidences of an evolving electricity market with increasing high penetrations of renewables and withdrawals of old coal-fired power plants. So everyone in 2016 remembers the statewide blackout South Australia had. So we had a massive storm that came through the state. The abridged version is we had a massive storm coming through the state. It created a bunch of tornadoes which ripped up and knocked over transmission lines. Those transmission lines falling over caused voltage disturbances in the network in South Australia, which caused a 415 megawatts of wind farms to trip off because of their protection settings. And that then cascaded to the interconnector overloading. It shut itself down, protect itself. And because those things happened within a second, the network couldn't cope and it just completely shut itself down to protect it. So the entire state went off. That blackout then necessitated the state government and the Commonwealth government to react. And what they initiated was the Finkel review, which its longer title was Independent Review into the Future Security of the National Electricity Market. When they talk about security of the market, they're talking about voltage and frequency mainly. Whereas people like to talk about reliability, like how reliable is something. In the national energy market here in Australia, reliability it refers to how much energy is produced and how much of that is, in terms of percentage, isn't produced. And it's a very, very small fraction of a percent. So reliability in the national electricity market is actually still pretty good. It's very reliable. Where the issue is is it comes into system security, which is that frequency and voltage control. It's how the system works. It has to operate at a frequency of, is it 60 hertz in Australia?
Yeah, I think 50.
50 hertz. It's 50 hertz. Yeah. So those things have to be kept in line so everything can operate normally. So in 2016, we had the statewide blackout in South Australia. But before that, we actually had a different event which actually precipitated a lot of policies and a lot of submissions to the various energy market bodies about the affordability of the network. So in July that year, we had a period where it was very cold. We had a lot of high pressure zones over Australia, which meant wind was producing very little. We were relying on gas generation. And at that time, because it was cold, there was a lot of demand for gas in terms of heating and those sorts of things. So the gas price went up quite high. A lot of gas generators were operating on spot market, which means they're buying gas at about $14 to $16 a gigajoule. That's Australian. And what that meant was the spot price of electricity in July was hovering around the $1,000 per megawatt hour. There was one business that I know of was paying $2.5 million a day in electricity, wow, which is not sustainable at all. And so that event, the statewide blackout, and then there was a couple of other load shedding events in November and February following that then really kind of made so in Australia we have all of our energy ministers in the states and the Commonwealth energy minister. They have they all get together at a meeting called COAG, and there is an energy kind of committee there. They all got together and commissioned Australia's chief scientist, Dr. Alan Finkel, to do this review into system security in the national electricity market. So that's where the Finkel review comes from. Before that, SACOME had been sending submissions to and talking about these system security issues since that July event. And one of the things that I picked up on when we were doing this research was that there were successive reports from the Australian energy market operator, AEMO, raising red flags and stating that system security was becoming a problem, particularly in South Australia, with higher and higher penetrations of renewables and withdrawals of existing generation like coal-fired power plants. So in 2015, South Australia, the Northern Power Plant, which is a coal-fired power plant, closed because they couldn't operate in the market anymore. And that was one of the first red flags that AEMO had said, yeah, this could be a problem. And then they did a review to these studies in 2016 stating, okay, Northern's closed down, we got higher and higher penetrations of wind in South Australia, this is going to be a problem in system security if we don't pay attention to it. Then it just rolled on. We had July that came around with the price volatility, and then September rolled around with the blackout, and basically what we saw was, they actually knew the red flags and the consequences of not acting. It just so happened that before the statewide blackout, SACOME was talking to AEMO, I reckon it was in January that year, and they did analysis on statewide blackouts and their scenarios for the Hayward interconnector failing. So if the Hayward interconnector that connects to South Australia to Victoria broke or failed or needed repairs, the statewide blackout could have gotten on for a lot longer. So for majority of South Australian residents, statewide blackout only lasted for a couple of hours for them. Everyone north of the line breaks was off for about 2 weeks, I believe. Mm. Everyone below the breaks came on all right because the Hayward interconnector was still there. It was still operational.
Still intact. It just had tripped.
Yeah, it was still intact.
I didn't realise that actually. I didn't, because I knew some infrastructure had failed. I thought the interconnector had failed. No, infrastructure elsewhere on the network had failed, and that had triggered a chain of events that caused the interconnector to trip. Exactly, and the interconnector had a protection setting. It's rated for 650 megawatts. It spiked to 900. Yeah, so to protect itself, it tripped. Yeah, it cut the breakers and that sort of stuff. So
Yeah, so we recognised all these things. We were talking with AMO, and everyone knew what was going to happen if no one did anything, and it still happened. And in terms of policy, and as someone who comes from that policy role, it's like being told the danger is there and you don't do anything about it and you get hurt and you go, oh, why did I get hurt?
Well, we know. We were telling you why. Because no one seems to have done anything.
So, coming back to those, what did SACOME recommend to the Finkel review? Well, the first two recommendations were effectively, this work already exists. Like, they're already assessing it. They're doing good work on it. There needs to be what we call a competent authority to be able to give powers of direction on system security issues, to say to the energy ministers, hey, look, you've got a problem here, you need to do something about it, or you're going to end up like South Australia did. So that was the first recommendation. The second one was there needs to be a continuous assessment of system security. So there needs to be like a traffic light system, red, amber and green, saying, this is a critical issue, this is an issue that needs to be watched, this isn't okay, this issue is okay. And what was really nice to see was when the Finkel review came with their final recommendations, they recommended two things out of all the ones they did. One was the establishment of the Energy Security Board, which is a board comprised of an independent chair and co-chair and the CEOs of the energy market operator, the energy regulator, and the Energy Market Commission. So basically the operator, the rule maker, and the regulator. And that aligned perfectly with that first thing. So the Energy Security Board, and you can find this on the COAG Energy Council, is that they're established now and they're looking at system security issues. And on the second point, the continual assessment of system security, they actually now doing something called the Health of the NEM report. So they're looking at where these system security issues are and they're flagging them in terms of red is critical, orange is watch, and green is this is okay. So it's good now that there is a body that is specifically saying to energy ministers, you've got a problem here, you need to deal with it. And they are, which is great now. So all that great work that AMO did, and they did that in partnership with the South Australian transmission operator Electronet, that's all being listened to now and reported. So really an energy minister or a department or whatever can't say, oh, we didn't know that report existed. Like there is an actual body now that says you've got a problem. That was two of the key recommendations that came out of SACOME that the Finkel review adopted, and we're quite proud that they actually took that on board and referenced it and used it. Some of the other ones were it's just all kind of industry associations have these kind of policies recommendations is that everything should be assessed on a technology neutral basis. So if you're looking at lowering emissions, well, in the energy sector, that's your end. The means should be neutral. So whatever technology can cut emissions, whether it's renewables, nuclear, or carbon capture and storage as well, should be looked at. You shouldn't just dismiss it because you don't like it. It narrows your assessment and it can, give you at least optimal outcome. Just looking at those things, like if you're going to bring in new policies, assess them on the three grounds that the Finkel review, they called it a trilemma: affordability, reliability and security, and low emissions. So those three things, assess them on those three outcomes. Say, for example, you're getting fantastic reliability and security, but it's not affordable and it's high emissions. Well, then there's no point in doing it. You should find a good balance. And for one of the things that we put forward at Bright New World and what I did at SACOME was nuclear fits all three. It can be affordable if you build it the right way, as we've seen internationally. It can provide system security services like frequency control. It does have a good reliability, like a lot of the nuclear power plants in the world have capacity factors of 90%. In terms of low carbon, well, it emits no carbon emissions during operation. So it's only the back end and the front end of the cycle that do it. And because uranium is so energy dense, its emissions are quite low. It's on par with wind. And that's from the IPCC. So, those were some of the recommendations we put forward. And it's funny, the recommendations that came out from the Finkel review were great. They were really well-rounded, solid things, and it led to things like the ACCC's retail price inquiry on electricity prices and a bunch of other things, which is great. But the issue is it's like when I worked at SACOME, and it's true for anyone who works in the space where they have to deal with government, is there's good policy, and then you've got to add a layer of politics over the top, and then you end up with whatever's left. What we're seeing now in Australia in terms of energy policy, so the recommendations for Finkel review are great, but then we come along and, we talk about things like, fair dinkum power and all that sort of stuff. And you look at it and you have to shake your head, because it's like you take a good policy and then both the political parties here in Australia will take the bits they like and ignore the bits they hate or are a bit too uncomfortable for them, and try and push through a policy that, kind of works, but it's not the most optimal solution.
It reminds me of an old Billy Connolly routine where he talks about, a committee is all about a body where a good idea comes in, it goes in, it gets bashed around and goes to a subcommittee and this, that, and it comes out a shadow of its former self and is
pretty much
used to nobody. I think, though, that because obviously we don't have a plan for the energy policy from federal government for how we're going to sort of move everything forward. Nothing sort of structured saying, okay, this is a really solid engineered way to manage it. But it does seem that perhaps the recommendations in these bodies that have been set up to provide advice or provide a watch over the system could be a good conduit to provide information to support that happening perhaps further down the line.
Yeah, exactly. And as things now, the digital age and that sort of stuff, it's all there. So it's you just got to know where to look for it and find it. And one of the things that organisations like Bright New World are doing, and other organisations should as well, is take these technical and highly these technical and policy rich reviews and documents and committees and all that sort of stuff, distill out the key messages and present them to the public in a way that they can understand. But there is a bit of caution there, though, with doing that. And people should be... This is where, those kind of critical thinking and analysis skills come in, is that every organisation has they have their own agendas, their own objectives. And at Bright New World and some work we're working on at the moment is to present those in a very clear and transparent manner, saying, this is what our objectives are for Bright New World. This is where we're heading. These are our ends, and these are the means we're going to adopt. So anything we say, you can go, oh, so that's where it's coming from. They're saying it for this reason, and be quite upfront and honest about that. The trap with what NGOs do is you take a government report, you distill it, and you present the facts only you want people to see, and you spin them. So it comes into political spin. You spin it the way you want to present it. And it is a trap that people can fall into accidentally because they are not being mindful of that. The more... I wouldn't go as far as saying it's unethical, but being deliberately like that, I think it's where NGOs fall over, and it gives everyone a bad name. It's where lobbyists get a bad name from. It's that sort of attitude towards things. It's great, these Commonwealth bodies and that sort of stuff, and that are doing all these fantastic reports, analysis, details, that sort of stuff. And then when people who come along, like membership associations like where I was at SACOME, or NGOs like we are at Bright New World, come along, the key for everyone to look at is going, okay, so Bright New World stands for this, this, and this. Are they presenting that information as neutrally as possible? There will be a little bit of bias. I won't go out and distill a report on saying we should expand the use of fossil fuels, but people should just keep that in the back of their mind when we're looking at all these kind of studies and reports and reviews, and the people who are presenting them, just to kind of go, oh, okay, so that's Bright New World there for energy development, low carbon, that sort of stuff. Are they presenting that as neutrally as possible? And as general manager of Bright New World, that is something that I'm impressing on everyone, is that you should be able to stand behind the work you do, and it should be robust, honest, and verifiable. And we're not in the game of hiding or being devious or those sorts of things with the information, because that just gives everyone else a bad name. And the general public, once in Australia, I like to say that Australians here have a great sense of knowing when something's not quite right. They've got a great BS detector. So when they see someone's talking BS, they go, yeah, you're full of it. You know, I'm not going to listen to you anymore, and they tune out. So this whole energy debate, you talk to the general public, they just care about what they see on an electricity bill, effectively. And if you come along and spin something and present it to them saying, I've said this a lot to people, and particularly in the renewable energy space, just to tell them to be careful, because coming back to South Australia, we have a high penetration of renewables in this state, but when people look at their electricity bills, they're not seeing price reductions flow through. So when people come out and say renewables can be cheap, they're going to be cheaper, your power price is going to be cheaper, build more renewables, well, people in South Australia look at their power bill and go, no, it's not. And while there is a complex relationship between those two things in the market, when the public look at it and someone says, build more, it's going to be cheaper, and then they say, we've built more and it's not cheaper, then people tend to tune out. They go, I don't care anymore. And that's bad, because we want to reduce emissions. And if people are presenting that particular perspective, and it's with good intentions, but it has unintended consequences and you're not aware of those, then it just hurts everyone else in the space. We as NGOs and people who distill and present information to the public to get them to act on certain issues, we've got to be really mindful of that fact that we could accidentally present something in a way that has consequences down the track that will run counter to what we do. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like what you said about how people or NGOs can fall into a trap of becoming biased. Because I think one of my favourite phrases or favourite concepts is that of Hanlon's razor, which basically says, never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity or ignorance. And
yeah,
I think that really is true for so many things that people get frustrated in life. You know, someone says, There's obviously someone acting malicious. It's probably not. It's probably some system stuffed up.
And a lot of the stuff that I see is general. It's basically, it comes down to, you know, people who are great at creating action and activism and that sort of stuff, and that's good. It's a positive thing for society. But what sometimes happens is grassroots activism and professional advocacy and lobbying, there's a step between the two. And what we see a lot happen is people come into the advocacy space, the professional advocacy space, and they've come from that activist kind of groups and mindset and mentality. And they are more interested in standing at the front of an organisation and picketing it and saying their message and getting on the news than actually, whereas someone who's in that professional advocacy space will actually go and talk to the company and work out where you can work on, say, if you want them to cut emissions, well, you could tell them you got to cut emissions and stand out the front and put pressure on them. But what that will mainly do is mainly push them into a corner, and they might react counter to what you want them to. And it's what we see a lot in the energy space is basically there's this war of two ideologies and everyone picks a team and picks a battle, but actually we all really have to work together to fix this problem because we're all in it. And by creating sides and battles and, you know, revolutions and all this sort of stuff, it's very combative and it's very counter to what we need to do. So you see that kind of step where people come in from that activism space, which is good, but they don't change their methods to actually meet the kind of objectives they want. So, you know, that's something bright in your world that I've been telling people is that action is great. You know, gaining attention for an issue is good, but you've got to do it in a way, whereas if you need a company to come on your side, going to them and yelling at them is going to get nowhere, because these are professional organisations. You know, people who deal with them know what that professionalism
I
is.
see it with Adani actually, and I've actually seen some
Exactly.
ads in the paper saying, basically hitting back and saying, no, we're going to go ahead with this. We're going to create the jobs, and we're going to do such and such. And what you're presenting is misinformation.
Yeah,
And that sounds like a direct example of what you're describing there.
Yeah, it is in a way, and it's looking at someone like here in South Australia, Santos, the oil and gas giant here. They're a South Australian company. They operate in the Cooper Basin in the north of the state. It's Australia's largest onshore oil and gas field. Going in and actually talking to them, because every organisation, this is what I found when I was in the mining industry. Every mine on site has an environmental body. They have a body there that's dedicated to doing environmental assessments and all those sorts of things. And all those people in that office, if you had to kind of pigeonhole them into a particular type of value set and ideology, you'd call them green. Like I went into one mine site and I walked into the environmental managers in the offices, their kind of space in the office building, and there's pictures of animals everywhere. There's samples of different flora and fauna that are specifically native to that area, and you look at it and you go, these people really care about the environment. They really care about what they do, and they're there to minimize impact as much as possible. And if you come at that company, for example, and you say, you guys are damaging the environment, you guys are destroying this, you guys are evil, you need to shut up shop, you need to go away. These people that actually are there to care about it, you're actually calling someone that would be your ally a bad person. And it's better, I found, to be open and to be honest about where you stand on issues, but not to be that aggressive, and to talk to them and work out, okay, we recognise that you can't be, say, for example, burning coal forever. What's the transition plan? What can we talk about? What can we do? What's your business plan? Where are you going with things? Those sorts of things. And then working on a compromise, because that's what's going to have to be. Like, you can't forcibly remove people and forcibly shut things down, because the green movement has values deeply seated in, this is going to get very political, libertarianism, individual freedoms, and that sort of thing. And the more and more you push an issue like that, the more and more authoritarian you become, and you're getting into the realms that where people in society we've always recoiled from. And that's going to be a fact of the future. We're going to have to work together to solve problems, because by yelling, say, for example, at Adani, you go home, go away. For example, I don't think a lot of people know this, Adani has a project to build a solar farm here in South Australia.
Yeah, right. Now,
the Stop Adani movement, does that mean they're going to stop their development of a solar farm here in South Australia? Well, the campaign has good intentions and it's something that we could get behind. You got to look at your means to get to your end and make sure you're not confusing the two, and make sure you're not doing something that will, in the long run, hurt your chances. Be counterproductive. What coal company is going to talk to those people? None. They will go out there and attempt to talk to them, but you look at some actions and that sort of stuff, and there's just no chance of conciliation or anything. And that's why we're in this situation where we have political policy stagnation on energy policy in Australia, because there's tribes and everyone's going to fight for their own tribe because that's what they're told to do. And it's not going to work. I'd rather be in talking to these companies or governments, or it doesn't matter what political party you are. I'm going to talk to you regardless of who you are and what you believe in, because we have to work together. We have to find a solution.
Going back to talking about environmental engineers and people in that space, I was talking to a person that was studying environmental engineering, and I asked them about what they were studying, and they said, "Oh, yeah, environmentalists. So you're essentially a greenie that's getting a degree in that space." And they said, "Yeah, that's exactly who I am."
Yeah, exactly.
They don't hide from it. And I mean, I've worked with large mining companies, and they have environmental engineers and conservation people, or people that, involved in that space, such that and even archaeologists. One of my best mates, he's an archaeologist, but one of his jobs was, his first, before a mine actually is opened out in a certain area, his job was to go out there, liaise with the traditional owners and look for artifacts of Aboriginal heritage, such as scar trees or shell middens or remains, and then, they decide with traditional owners, what are they going to do with them? Are they going to put a buffer around it, or are they going to have them moved and sort of recovered, and they'll make a museum piece out of it later on? But there's a fair bit that goes on in a modern mining company that is not the same as what happened in the 20th century and before.
Oh, exactly. And going to the Aboriginal heritage thing, I know a lot of companies, they're very keen to talk to, in Australia, each Aboriginal group have a native title claim to an area where they go, okay, our people have had a continuous relationship with this land and it's recognised by the federal court here in Australia. And the companies that go into these areas, it's the first thing they do. They go and talk to whichever native title group there is in that area, and they're very keen to work with them. There's a lot of opportunity that comes into areas that have no opportunity. And the people who are the Aboriginal liaison people, they care deeply about those connections. And there's a fantastic example here in South Australia. There's a new copper mine that's opening around the Roxby kind of Olympic Dam area called Carrapateena. And the company there, Oz Minerals, the work they did with the native title there, the Cockatoo people, is amazing, involving them in every step in the way. I believe they've named the camp or the airstrip that's there with an Aboriginal name. They're very respectful to the culture that's been there. Same thing with the Beverley uranium mine. They're in Adamantna land, and they've provided opportunity into an area where there was just tourism, basically. And there's people who work at that mine that have jobs, careers and skills now that they wouldn't ordinarily have, that can then go on to other projects or those sorts of things. I know, and we presented this evidence to the Royal Commission, the Honeymoon uranium mine, the royalties from that went to the people helped them purchase the Wilpena Pound Resort in the Flinders Ranges, which is one of the premier kind of locations in the Flinders Ranges. Gave them the opportunity to have now their culture presented to every tourist and visitor that comes into that region now who goes through the Wilpena Pound. People like to talk about the environmental impact and damage of development and that sort of stuff in areas, but what also happens is when, particularly in Australia where mines are in remote locations, you're having people and places go into an area that ordinarily wouldn't have people there, and you're finding endangered species that are thought there was only a handful left, and actually we've gone into this area and we found out there's a huge population here. So then the company will look at going, okay, how can we protect these? Because this is essential. It's like, how can we do this? There's a great example. The Olympic Dam mining lease is a part of it that they've basically said to an environmental organisation called Arid Recovery, here, take this land, rehabilitate it, reintroduce species. And they've reintroduced the bilby. And that was basically, and there's I'm trying to think the name. I think it's like the Womma snake or something like that. It's up in like the eastern corner of South Australia. They basically thought this thing didn't exist, like it was on the verge of extinction. It didn't exist. And then they found it again in the area because the mine went there. And because the mine was there, a bunch of environmental engineers and officers were out there, and they go and do land surveys and they found it. And this is the thing that people tend to forget, is not only, yes, there is an impact, and people try to minimize the impact as much as possible, but also there is a group of people that go along with that project that actually do care and will go in that area, and you might find even flora that you thought didn't exist anymore, you find it again. By the act of having a place there, you're eradicating pest species. So I know, there's environmental officers that their job is to eradicate pest species like feral cats. Feral cats kill a lot of native reptiles and birds, and by taking away that feral pest, they are then now enabling that population to flourish again. And that's what we're seeing. So effectively, these projects, these things, they have a lot of positive impacts other than just the fallback. yeah, basically the economic, job impacts. There's a lot of actual other positive impacts that do come along with these sorts of things.
When I had my interview with Daniel Zavatiero, one of the things he said was one of the biggest things for wondering how much resource we have, if we seem to be running out of resources, go out and survey and look for them. And chances are you're going to find resources out there. Now, it also seems fitting that you would also find, as you've described, flora and fauna that the people are finding new pockets of them.
Exactly, yeah. And when they go out to an area, they have to survey it and they have to present a plan to the department and what they found and what these species are. They have to do an environmental assessment. So when you do those sorts of things, you tend to find stuff that you ordinarily wouldn't have found in those areas. So there are these kind of positive benefits that come along that people don't realise, and that if you just go out and demonise the company, then you're just kind of ignoring all that other work as well. And there's some conservation groups that will fight against a project and not realise that actually there could be some quite significant conservation benefits that come with the project.
Fascinating. All right, so what's a good energy? We're going to come back to energy now after sort of talking about mine development and such.
Yeah.
But what's a good effective energy policy that the government should pursue? What could it involve? And sort of, well, I mean, I suppose you've already kind of answered this, but were the Finkel review recommendations a good start for that?
Yeah, the Finkel review recommendations were a good start. It's important to note that the Finkel review looked at system security, and they came up with that energy trilemma, which was affordability, reliability and security, and low carbon. Because they realised that those three things are all essential for Australia's electricity market. And with energy policy, what I helped develop at SACOME was just a basic framework that you could apply any issue to, and you could work out whether it's an important issue and that sort of stuff. One of the key things was technology neutrality. So basically, you don't exclude choices just because you don't like them. You have to keep all of them in the mix to work out what's the optimal outcome. So one of those things in Australia is including nuclear, because it has been proven internationally to work at cutting emissions, and we have seen grids that have nuclear energy with cheaper prices than what we have here. Just to talk about prices, South Australia, when the ACCC did their retail price inquiry, and for those international listeners, in Australia we have the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the ACCC, which is basically there to protect consumer rights. So if someone is fleecing people out of money or delivering a dodgy service and charging a high price for it, the ACCC is there to basically slap them down effectively.
I've used it before. They're pretty good. They put out some pretty good information for people at all levels, even if it's just someone that's a single consumer. Yeah,
exactly. And the ACCC, I have a lot of respect for them, because at SACOME we did a project to bring together some of our biggest members' electricity load and to use that combined load to initiate a power price contract to improve competition in the South Australian market. The ACCC, through the whole process, are fantastic. They're very professional. They know what their remit is. They know what they're doing. I have a lot of time for the ACCC, and I'm kind of one of the things about Australia that it's fantastic that we have this body there to protect consumers. And so they did a retail price inquiry to look at why price is so high. South Australia, this is on an international basis, so they've adjusted it and made it all compared apples to apples. South Australia has an international electricity price of 47.8 cents per kilowatt hour. You compare that to somewhere like Sweden and France that are in the 30 to 27 cents per kilowatt hour range.
These are in US dollars?
In Australian dollars.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're Australian dollars. And then you look at places like Denmark and Germany. Well, Denmark's 50 cents and Germany's 49 cents. So that's retail price. So that's what you pay. That's what the consumer pays. You look at that sort of a chart, and the ACCC has that in their price inquiry final report, and also the other report that if you want to know about retail prices and competition in the electricity and gas market in Australia, is the Australian Energy Regulator, the AER, have a report they do every year called the State of the Energy Market. In that report, it has all these sorts of details, what the retail prices are, the breakdowns, network, what part's wholesale, what part's green policies and all that sort of stuff. And if anyone wants to know about like prices, the AER State Energy Market Report's a fantastic place to go. So yeah, you look at those sorts of prices and you look at those sorts of energy makeups in those grids, and there are other factors as well that you have to keep in mind, but at a passing glance, you look at that and you go, are we doing the right thing here? Is what we are doing correct? Is because we're excluding one kind of key technology choice, are we getting a less optimal outcome? Because you look at Germany and they're just above South Australia in terms of electricity price, and they're going hard into renewables, withdrawing nuclear and winding down coal. So you look at that policy and then you look at what's happening on the affordability scale and you go, are we putting too much into two categories and not enough into another? So are we unbalancing the kind of the trilemma? And so one of those key kind of policy positions is to have a technology neutral approach, is that your end goal is these three things: affordability, reliability, security, and low carbon. That's your goal. It's not to build lots of wind or solar or hydro or nuclear or coal or gas. It's to get to those three outcomes, and the pathway, make sure it's a technology neutral approach, because otherwise you might miss out on something. And, you know, looking at these sorts of charts, you kind of go, maybe we are, and maybe we need to look at it a little bit closer. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a, I think Germany is still running 7 nuclear reactors at the moment. And I think they're all due to shut in the early 2020s. But the fact that they are still running and still providing a significant amount of their electricity, I shudder to think what is going to happen when they shut them down. Because as far as I know, it's when you pretty much elect to shut down a reactor in the world the way it stands at the moment, that's it. It's going to happen. There's not too much you can do to reverse that decision. And when that happens, I think, oh God, it's a bad situation is just going to get worse.
Yeah, and you got to, and the key thing is to like pay attention to the people who are the ones that have operated and managed this stuff for eons. Like it's premature to like just dismiss these people as the entrenched, like, you know, what we hear, the entrenched, you know, energy monopoly. You know, these people have experience and expertise in areas that is essential for determining these sorts of things. In South Australia, it's funny, we used to have I suppose you call it a nationalised electricity operator and network manager, ETSA. And back in 2003 or 4, I reckon, when South Australia was going to push heavily into wind, they commissioned a report about what are some of the things we need to be aware of. And one of the things they came up with is with the higher and higher penetrations of variable generation, so generation that's weather dependent, is that you're going to run into these problems of system security and potentially affordability. And if it's not managed appropriately. That was back in 2003, and that was written by people who were people from that entrenched sector, the people that were there when coal was generating that sort of stuff. They said this could be a warning. Now, some people will go, oh yeah, that's because they worked with coal, they don't like wind, they do that report. But the thing is, these people are experts, they're electrical engineers, they know what they're talking about, and what we've seen now in actual reality was they were right. It's paying attention to these people that know what they're talking about. They actually say pretty sensible stuff.
It's often the shill thing. Oh, you're just a shill for X.
Yeah, that.
It's very frustrating when people pull that. It says, well, no, these are people that know their stuff. They're very good at what they do, but you know, perhaps you don't like what they're offering.
Yeah, and that comes back to what we talked about earlier about familiarization and talking about things. You know, people who fall, like, there are some people that you can never reason with because they are so entrenched in their ways, they are never changing, right? They're like a typical conservative. They're not going to change. They're going to keep it the way it is, keep it the way it is. I want to keep it this way. I've seen this a lot, particularly in the pro-nuclear space, and you know, I'm going to bring this up, is that for so many years, people in the nuclear industry have been beaten down by claims that they're killing babies, and that there is this wounded reaction to people who go, oh, you guys had Chernobyl. And there is this knee-jerk reaction that goes on the full offensive. Like, you know, you're wrong, you're an idiot, you know, you're thinking irrationally and all this sort of stuff. And that what I found is some people that actually say it because they think that's what you're supposed to say. You know, that's the perception of what you have to do. And that when you sit down with them and you get them to unpack their thoughts on it and you talk to them, like you let them talk, you help them unpack the issue. You go, oh, okay, Chernobyl, so what was the thing about that? And you talk through it. You don't tell them they're a bad person for thinking it and that sort of stuff. You know, I come from the position that I'll just give someone the benefit of the doubt. I'll let them talk. You know, I know a few people now that I've spoken to about nuclear issues that were against it. They were against it. It's just what they weren't, you know, actively against it, but they didn't want to support nuclear anyway. If someone's proposed a nuclear reactor to be built in Torrens Island here in Adelaide, they'd be like, no way. And I'll talk to them about it. I'll get them explain things to me about the risk they think and all that sort of stuff, and we unpack it. And I've had the point where I've got people either go, well, actually, I don't mind anymore. And then there's some people that go, actually, I want to help you. Wow. I want to get this message out too. Whenever I have an interaction on social media or like Facebook, Twitter with Bright New World and that sort of stuff, or in public, when I'm talking to someone, I just give them the benefit of the doubt and I just unpack it with them. I go on the journey with them because they're going to have to, and Ben talks about this, about his story. He had to unpack it over a long time to like each little step he thought and then realize, oh, hang on, I got this wrong. And it's hard for people to say I was wrong. You know, and if you put them in a position where it's public and you go and try to like force them to say they were wrong, they're not going to do it. You get them to talk about it and you have a conversation. I see some people on Twitter that people go, oh, I'm not going to talk to that person. That person's, you know, anti-nuclear, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, let's talk to them about it. You know, I'm happy to talk to you and sit down and have a coffee and unpack it with you and that sort of stuff. And sometimes you come to this conclusion where someone goes, look, I'm not going to support it like it is here, but if these things are done, then I'm happy to. And I'm like, well, that's fine. I'm happy with that too, you know. And you know, we can move on from that and move forward. And it comes back to that thing. We all got to work together to get through this. So, and that's one of the kind of the big things, you know. Everyone, like all of our supporters at Bright New World and those who will listen to this and that, I say is like, if someone comes to you and is like, oh, but you guys caused Fukushima and Chernobyl and you killed all these babies and that sort of stuff, just breathe and give them the benefit of the doubt and then ask them why. And then you can see when you ask why and you let them unpack it. And then when you find it, like, 'cause you can easily see straight away whether, yeah, that person is entrenched, they're never going to move, they're just trolling me, ignore them. Whereas someone starts talking and then you unpack it. Like I saw, there was someone on Twitter yesterday that came out and said, you know what, I was wrong.
I think I know the one you're talking about. I think he's an editor for a Power magazine too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he goes, I was wrong on this issue. And
he's very tentatively said, I think there's a role here for nuclear.
Exactly, yeah. So he's like, oh, okay, I've looked at this, I've unpacked it, maybe there is something here. So, you know, that's Ben's story, you know, and that's a lot of other people. I think, like, I've always been supportive of the technology. I've spoken to people in the past couple of months that have changed their minds and that they're slowly coming on board. And it's just talking to them and letting them and actually humanising the industry. One of the most interesting things is I show people the movie Pandora's Promise because I have a copy of that. And of all the people in that documentary, the person who I got the most reaction to was Charles Till. Now, Charles Till was I think he's the program director of the Integral Fast Reactor at Argonne, Idaho National Laboratories. He was talking about his project and about how the reactor, they actually tested accidents on it. They did a 3 Mile Island accident scenario. They did a Fukushima-style accident scenario before that even happened. They did a Chernobyl-style accident scenario, and the reactor shut itself down. It didn't melt down. They just gave it the accident conditions, took their hands off of it, and it shut itself down. And when he talks about his project, and this is the feedback I was getting, is when people talk about, when he was talking about that project, and you could see how genuine he was in his emotions and his pride in the project and how upset he looked when the project was shut down, people look at that and they go, he's not a faceless monster. He's not a faceless corporation. Like, it humanized it, because you notice a lot of the stuff you see from the anti-nuclear side is they dehumanize the sector, the industry. They make it like it's an evil corporation. It's an evil entity. It's not a person. Once you start to do that and you humanize the industry and you say, look, if you want to talk to a nuclear engineer, there are nuclear engineers on social media. They'll be happy to answer any question you've got. And people go, it's okay. That's a lot different. And they start unpacking it. And, you know, it's satisfying when people, you know, realize they come, you know, to a certain conclusion on issues and they go, actually, I've learned something today. And, you know, I might not support it because I still have these concerns. I'm a lot more comfortable about it. I'm not as anxious or fearful of it, you know. So that's one of the main things we do here in Bright New World, is to try and have that vision, have that approach to people and things, and get things moving.
A lot of people are quite down onto the social media, and especially Twitter, but I think a lot of that comes from people just wading into tribal political issues. And yeah, no joke, there is a lot of that happens on there, and I try and sidestep a lot of that as much as I can. But you're absolutely right. There is, and it's not just nuclear engineers, it's anyone with any kind of technical capability.
Yeah.
And you look around and just some of the stuff that you wouldn't even thought about. It was, someone did a thread, I can't even remember who it was, but it's like a food science professional. And they had a thread on just ugly food and what happens to food, and what about, you know, movements. People say, no, we should have more ugly food in the supermarket. And she just went through the whole thing of, no, this is how the industry works. Like, ugly food doesn't need to go into the supermarket. It's not wasted. It becomes fruit juice or potato salad or whatnot. And just all these things that are very logical, make a lot of sense, and they go through it. Today I learned something. This is, whatever industry or whatever aspect you would think, you know, there's someone on Twitter who covers that, and you can really learn a lot and get a bit more of an insight on sort of how anything in the world works. So I think it's actually, you know, to come out in defense of social media, I think that's actually a very important aspect, a very powerful thing people can take away from it.
And even if it's not, because social media is quite public, it's like a public forum. Even emailing, because it's easy to find people's emails online now, like emailing someone from an organisation or a research institution or a university that's an expert in that area that you're wanting to look into, and you send them an email. I've seen, like, when I was at SACOME, I used to get emails every now and then from students asking questions about things or people wondering about something, and we respond to them. And yeah, of course, you know, you work for an advocacy membership-based organisation, so people are going to have to go, oh, okay, so that's come from the perspective of an organisation that has the respective sectors input into their policy directions and that sort of stuff. And you have to kind of take it with that sort of grain of salt. But saying to them, oh, okay, look, I've contacted some companies and here's the feedback from their people who are experts in, say, environmental protection and management, and this is the facts as they are, and you just stand behind them and you say, look, they're honest. You know, we're not trying to spin or bend your arm. It's just, you know, this is what it is and how it operates, that sort of stuff. And people do reward honesty eventually. They look at it and go, actually, of all the people that gave us feedback, that organisation was the least BS orientated. They're the ones that gave us some actually honest feedback. So it's just the way it's going to have to be.
This has been the first half of the interview with Dayne Eckermann. The next episode will pick up from here. A big thanks to Dayne for making time for this podcast. A library's worth of materials were mentioned in this interview. And links for media referenced are listed in the description. If you listened to my 2019 intro episode, you will know this, but I'll mention it here as well. The EPCB Act is due for formal review this year. A way to speak up about your support of nuclear technology in Australia can be getting in touch with your local ministers. To facilitate this, a small group of us have used the One-Click Politics service to provide an easy way to do this. The page can be found at http://bit.ly/r140a. Link included in the description. Big thanks to Eric Meyer and Generation Atomic for making this happen. Thank you for listening. Australia has the responsibility to do its part along with the rest of the world in addressing climate change. Although not a large nation or economy, our national neighbours look to Australia for leadership in many aspects. Clean energy and innovation into such technologies are of paramount importance, the most powerful of which we have outlawed. Running a developed nation requires reliable, cheap energy. Renewables are fine to a point, but the balance will be covered either by continuing with more coal power or finally embarking on a nuclear build program. This has been Going Fission, hosted by Logan Smith.